To the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is, I've already forgotten the title. Today's title is relativity. And the conversation is about how we can shift our perspective or how our perspective shifts based on comparisons and the things that we choose to compare ourselves to or against, and how we're interpreting things relative to what. Good morning, Rosalind. Rosalind says TGIF. Well, happy Friday to everybody. Welcome to everybody. It's great to have you here with us, Rosalind, and everybody else who's joining us. Welcome, welcome. So we're talking about relativity, and it's very interesting. We talk a lot about perspective and context, and maybe it's different versions of the same conversation, but it warrants a continued attention, I think, when we think of most of what we think of relative to something else. And I think this is a really interesting shift of perspective to be talking about. It's kind of the glass being half full or half empty, or more full or more empty. And I have a couple examples. I was talking to someone yesterday, and they were talking about how they went into a panic because their investment portfolio was down 20%. And I said, well, that's interesting. My portfolio is down to 1/8 of what it had been, not 1/5 of what it had been, 1/8 of what it had been. And their eyes popped. And it was interesting because in looking at my portfolio, it's down from its height, because I'm in crypto, and crypto's really volatile, and I know it's going to come back, but just whatever, from its height, my portfolio is now 1/8 of what it was. However, it's still way above the investment that I've made. So I can be looking at this same number from the vantage point of the loss that I took or the gains that I've made. And it's really a both and. It's an opportunity for us to, again, as ever, to manage our thinking. I didn't even do our grounding exercise. I guess today we get to just jump into it without our getting centered. Maybe now that I'm thinking about it, maybe it's a good idea to take a second to get centered. Maybe we can do it a little differently. Maybe we can rub our hands together and use our breath at the same time, and take a deep breath in through our nose and hold it while we're rubbing our hands together. And exhale slowly, 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 and just hold your hands together and feel your fingertips against one another. Just be conscious of what that sensation is, and then feel the magnetism between your palms. And then just allow yourselves to sort of sink into your physicalness for a minute. So, relativity, when we talk about time and space, another example is a friend was talking about, moving ahead with all the other all the other people, you know, moving at a certain speed. Let's say we're all moving at a speed of 50 miles an hour, then all of a sudden, you know, you break out and you're moving 70 miles an hour. It's appearing that you're only moving 20 miles an hour faster than the crowd. The 50-mile an hour velocity is kind of invisible, right? If it's relative to the crowd, if it's relative to the landscape, then you get to see that it's 70 miles an hour. You know, so our interpretations of the world are very relativistic. Um, our interpretations of doom and gloom and destruction are relative to certain measures that we've adopted, and our determinations as to whether to be in despair or hopeful is also relative to whatever our context is, right? So this was also another interesting example. Last night on movie night, we had a guest named John Fullerton, who he's a guy who came from Morgan Stanley and banking and big money, and he at one point just felt like the system kind of wasn't representative of what his values were, and he's recalibrated himself and his perspectives and has pioneered something called regenerative capitalism and regenerative economics. And regenerative capitalism is based in the understanding of living systems and actually incorporates all the things that are really important, like clean air, clean water, natural resources, quality of life, all kinds of things that aren't accounted for in our standard notions of economics. And, you know, we were talking about hopefulness, and he said he's actually really hopeful. And this is a beautiful conversation, I think, because he said he's really hopeful because he knows that in living systems respond to pressure, and then that pressure initiates unanticipated change and transformation. And what we're experiencing is profound pressure. And it happened that the interview that I did with him that we aired last night was right after the second most recent mass shooting. And we were talking about the pressure of that event exerting, you know, the pressure that that event is exerting on our collective consciousness, or those two events are exerting on our collective consciousness. And that in conjunction with the our Roe v. Wade determination, and yesterday the Supreme Court determination that essentially disemboweled the power of the EPA to protect the environment. These are things that are occurring, pressures that are occurring, and it seems that they're occurring in an accelerated pace. And the question is, how much pressure can the system withstand before it makes the dramatic transformation and change that it needs to make in response to that pressure? And I believe we've spoken about the transformation of the caterpillar to the butterfly, and there are these imaginal cells. That's what they're called, imaginal cells, that when the caterpillar has eaten and eaten and eaten and gotten really obese, these imaginal cells sort of coalesce, and the caterpillar goes into a cocoon, and the imaginal cells are part of its turning into mush and into this new possibility that then emerges ultimately as a butterfly. And that's kind of the same idea as this system that the pressure is exerted on to create this transformational change. But so that's kind of a wonderful way to be considering what's going on right now in case you were facing despair and hopelessness. This is, you know, there's a hopefulness about saying when is enough enough, and when enough is enough, or when enough is too much, that's when the system transforms. And so when we go back to this relativity thing, we can recognize that here's somebody who is in making an interpretation relative to their understanding of living systems that says that pressure is what is going to create change, and they're seeing pressure, and that's a hopeful sign of positive evolutionary change. And at the same time, other people will be seeing all this pressure and saying everything's going into the dumpster, you know, that everything's going to pot, and seeing the hopelessness and despair related to it. So Rosalind says the light can be blinding after being in the darkness for so long. Yes, that's so true. It takes adjustment for all our senses to get used to a new reality. I heard that's why pirates wore an eye patch, so that one eye could adjust quickly when going down below deck. Oh, that is fascinating, actually. Don't know if it's true, but what a beautiful piece of trivia, and what a beautiful piece of information, actually, or conceptualization, right? We have two eyes, and what you're talking about is being able to accommodate the polarity, the light and the dark, all at the same time, you know, or to be able to adjust to circumstances, and to be making provisions for that. I think that's brilliant. Very, very, very interesting. So the question is, in this relativistic universe, you know, when we look at how we think about ourselves, many of us, we compare ourselves to others, right? And if we compare ourselves, there are always people that are less skilled and more skilled at whatever our skills are. There are always people who are less and more of whatever we choose to look at for self-assessment or self-judgment. And so it's interesting because we tend to I think that our self-judgments tend toward the negative, you know, challenge me on that, if you will. But for the most part, what I recognize is that our self-judgments are typically negative, typically set up to sabotage ourselves in some way, shape, or form, you know, or to judge ourselves as less than. Maybe not all the time, but maybe I tend to, maybe it's just that in my line of work, I'm dealing with people that are discussing their negative self-judgments rather than their positive self-judgments. But in any case, what are we judging ourselves against? You know, it's interesting when we look at where we are. How do we determine where we are? We determine where we are relative to something else, right? If I'm going between point A and point B, I'm going to assess where I am relative to either my to my distance or my closeness to one of those points. So let's say I'm judging myself or I'm assessing my position based on point B, and I'm a quarter of the way on the journey. I'm 3/4 of the way from point B. So I'm far away from point B. Once I pass the halfway mark, then I'm closer to point B, right? Than I am to point A. So it's when we look at how we're judging ourselves or evaluating or assessing ourselves, are we assessing ourselves based on what we've achieved or how far we have yet to go? I think that's a really important question. Also, one that I have been visiting with clients and always attempting to have clients recognize their progress, because they may not be where they are, but they're further along the path. And it's so interesting because I have one particular client who I see has made such profound progress, like remarkable progress, that I think anybody would agree to except them. You know, because their measure is where they want to be, so they don't see how far they've come, and they don't even see that they're closer to where they want to be. They just see that they're not there yet. So it's not even the continuum that they're present to. It's just kind of black and white. I'm not where I want to be, not like I'm making progress. And that actually makes me think about how we often are oriented exclusively to the destination rather than the journey. And as a result of that kind of thinking, being only destination oriented, we discount and disavow the value of the journey itself. And the fact is that the journey is what most of life is. You know, when you get to the destination, that's it, you're done. You know, it's, and the journey is where the living takes place. The destination is just a marker. So I find it so fascinating the way we our relativity. So Rosalind says, when we have tried too much or are wounded for staying too, when we have tried too much, are wounded for staying too long and reached a dead end, what if there's nowhere to go except to surrender? Rosalind, thank you for that, because I'm experiencing that with some clients too, that there's just so much struggle. And what arises is surrender. And the thing is, when we surrender, so I've already told you guys, surrender and I, the word surrender and I have a kind of extreme mismatch, because I grew up with the Wizard of Oz, and my association for surrender is the Wicked Witch of the West saying, "Surrender, Dorothy." So it's like, no, I'm never going to give up kind of thing is my response. But what I see is holding on so hard to our limiting beliefs, holding on so hard to the way we want things to be rather than the way things are, holding on so hard to this fabrication of what should be, for example, is what creates resistance, because then life never can measure up to what should be. This magical fabrication of fairy tale land of how life should be. And the more we hold on to that, the more beat up we're going to get. When we allow ourselves to be with life as it is, that's when we have an opportunity for incredible transformation, because otherwise we're fighting against what is. You can't get from here to there unless you know where here is, right? You can't get directions anyway unless you know where here is. And if we're in denial about where here is, and we're fighting and we're struggling and we're wounded and we're getting beat up by the slings and arrows because we are holding so fast to something that is a total fabrication, when we finally let it go, when we finally just give up holding like that, that's when life has an opportunity to happen. And that's when we can experience a quantum shift, because we are relinquishing our vice-like grip on the thing that is creating us such pain. So when we've tried too much or are wounded for staying too long and reached a dead end, there is a point of despair, perhaps, that we just finally say, okay, I give up. And it is in that giving up that artifice can crumble, so that we can then actually reemerge from a new place of being. And it's tragic in its way that seems to be the way it works, because we don't let go easily of our beliefs and ideas of how things should be. Most of us, it takes being hit with a sledgehammer to get shaken out of a misperception. And it's unfortunate that it takes that much. I'm wondering, I think that perhaps as we become more evolved, perhaps we don't hold on as tenaciously. By the way, if you guys are writing comments and I'm not responding, it's because I don't see the comments. So if you want to go to the Enlightened World Network Facebook page, you can put your comments in there, and then I'll see them and I'll be delighted to respond to you. Rosalind says, what if the boundaries could have been seen as temporary to protect you, but because we're evolving and expanding, those boundaries don't serve as best anymore? I love that perception. I mean, that works for me because for a couple reasons. One is that it's allowing that things are perfect as they evolve. right? That we go through that. That's the second part, is that we go through an evolutionary process, that life is not static, and our ideas, our beliefs, our beingness also are not static. When we allow for things to evolve and grow and develop and change, that's life affirming, right? But when we make rigid structure, there's a brittleness to that is antithetical to life. You know, life is an ebb and a flow. Life is cyclical and based in change and dynamic. And so when we set boundaries, initially, to your point, Rosalind, those boundaries can be protective. And then at some point, as circumstances change, if we don't adapt, those boundaries become constrictive. Those boundaries become suffocating and no longer appropriate. So this is, again, to circle back around to this notion of relativity. We live our lives relative to everything else. And as we recognize that, we get to choose the comparisons, the things that we're measuring against. Good morning, Sue. So good to have you joining us this morning. It's wonderful to have you here with us. Thank you for chiming in. So be alert when you're comparing yourself to someone or something. Be alert to what it is you're comparing yourself to. Like there's always something to reach toward. We can say, oh, that's where I would like to be, versus or that's where I'm evolving to, or my version of that is where I'm evolving to. There's something there that I'm looking to expand in myself as a potential and possibility, versus I'm not enough, you know. And also be willing to recognize you can even compare your current self to your past self and say, wow, not compare, but observe, wow, what a long way I've come. You know, when I look at my history and I look at where I am now, there's no way I could have gotten here from there, because it's not a linear path. You know, it's the pressure happens. So the pressure happens, and then there's a pop to a new quantum level. And it's not predictable. That's part of living systems. So that's where our hopefulness can come from. And so relative to what? That's a really good question to ask yourself when you're beating yourself up. Ask yourself, relative to what? And allow yourself to have a broader perspective and be present to the bigger picture. And with that, this is a Friday, so This is my opportunity to welcome you into a beautiful weekend. And I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. I go live here each weekday morning, so not Saturday and Sunday, here on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and the Enlightened World Network YouTube channel, which is where Sue chimed in from. And at 9 a.m. Eastern. And I invite all of you to check out all the other awesome programming on Enlightened World Network, EWN One with the Earth, Enlightened World Living. And I so deeply appreciate your engagement in these conversations and your participating and your presence. And until next time. So